Today is October 7th, 2024, and while we commemorate a yard site on the Hebrew date of an event, the day October 7th is well known to people on the secular calendar, and of course everyone is taking note of this day, which is October 7th, and I want to share with you thoughts that I've shared in a weekly class that I have on a book called The Gate of Trust, and how a Jew responds with a high level of faith and trust in God in regards to challenging situations. And now, it's not easy to apply these teachings and to begin practicing seeing the world this way through such an overwhelmingly horrific event like October 7th. However, the day brought up the questions, and I'm going to share with you a segment of my class where I discuss this. I will say that this can be very upsetting to some people. At the same time, it will offer you a perspective that is enormously liberating. If you want to offer yourself a perspective and way of looking at everything that happens in your life from a vantage point that can liberate you from much of the frustration that we experience in this world, this can do that. And you will probably want to listen to this numerous times, perhaps even once a week, until you find yourself actually living out what it is that is taught here. This is how the Jewish people have gotten through thousands of years of oppression and murder throughout our history. It's with this perspective, and it is with this perspective that we will greet the coming of Mashiach. I hope that you find this meaningful, and I hope that this helps you respond to the events of October 7th in a way that raises up the Jewish people to be a far greater light to the entire world that we can clearly see is happening during this period of time.
It's really hard to look at what's going on in Israel from a standpoint. And I've listened to plenty of your videos, I understand, but it's like every time I feel like I'm starting from scratch when it comes to applying this to what's going on. How do we look at it this way? How do we look at it then it's God who's creating the situation, and it's just every time I think about it, it's confusing and it's hard to see it that way.
Yes, I agree with you that it's very hard to see it that way. And we want to reach a point. It's not a point. We want to, over time, begin to actually see it this way, even though it's very hard. And that is that, I mean, and you know, through our history, we've had horrific things happen to us. And the very best thing and the truest perspective that we can have is that for some reason which we will never understand, and for some reason which we never should understand, I want to emphasize, we should understand. Some people try to understand and give reason, which is very wrong, because there is nothing within human logic that can justify, in human logic, right, in the limits of our understanding, how such horrific atrocities could possibly happen. And with our inability to understand it whatsoever, we also embrace it with faith that when something happens, it happens because God will say, in some way we can say lets it happen. We can more strongly we can say God makes it happen, and both of them are true. For a reasons beyond what we can understand, there are silver linings that we can definitely take out of it, such as what you probably heard on many of my videos. Those are why we describe those as silver linings, such as the fact that Israel is responding to our enemies in ways they should have 50 years ago, and they're responding that way now. And that's a silver lining to the overwhelming event that happened, but it doesn't justify it, right? It doesn't explain it. And then to also and then we have context and meaning, at least in approaching this. Otherwise, we are victims of our enemies, which is never productive. Okay, I have to think about the right word to use here, but we are not victims of our enemies. We are. When I say victim here, I mean victim in contrast to victim as if we are as if they control us. We are not victims of our enemies. There is an experience which is horrific, which is beyond what the mind can grasp, that God wanted us to experience. We will never know the full reason why, but we will take any reason that we can to turn these horrific events into something positive. And this is the healthiest and the most productive way to respond to any circumstance or event that happens to someone in life. Now, we're going to see soon that this is true for ourselves. That means when an event happens to me, and in some respect, October 7th happened to all of us, in some respect,
Yes.
but not nearly in the same way it happened to the people who it happened to directly. To those people, we do not tell them, lecture them with what I'm saying. To them, we show enormous love and compassion. But for ourselves, and that's a general rule, that everything we're learning here we're learning in the context of a class. We're not in the middle of a human event right now, although some of you, and probably all of us, are in the middle of our own events, right? But we're learning it in the context of a class, which I would describe as academic, with the hope. My goal is that this class not be academic alone, but with the hope that we choose to implement this in our lives and in the events that we experience in our life, and that we are a shining example to other people of how to respond to events in our life in the true and healthy context. But when other people are in the middle of events of their life, we only show them compassion. We don't preach to them how they should be looking at it. Hopefully, more and more people will look at their events this way by learning about it and training themselves to live life this way. And then when they find themselves in whatever events they may find themselves in, they'll have this perspective. And there are many, many Jews, by the way, I just want to say, who have gone through the most horrific of events and embrace their events in this context. And I will tell you, like, one huge difference between someone who embraces it in this context and someone who doesn't, on the practical level, is that when we embrace very, very difficult circumstances in life within this context, we have a context within which to carry the enormously painful burden that we have. Now, if you can carry a burden, then you can move forward. But if we don't have a context within which to carry the burden, then the burden crushes us. Now, I also want to add that every single Jew has this context inherently within us, because our soul knows this to be true. And the soul, when I say the soul knows this to be true, it knows it to be true not from a place of intellect, of understanding. It inherently, the soul responds to reality this way. And that's why you will find that many Jews, in response to October 7th, who made the ultimate sacrifices, they are carrying their pain, even though they're not religious people and never study Shara B'tachon, but they respond from a trust point of view. You can hear them and listen to what they say. They do respond from a trust context, and that's how they're moving forward. Like you may know the story about the father who lost his son, and he's a I don't know, diamond dealer. He sells diamonds, and he began to offer a diamond to any Israeli soldier who's getting engaged. And he's given out, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I don't remember exactly, like I think he gave out over 100 diamond rings already for free to people getting engaged. He started with one. He just offered one, but when he offered one, one person, the first person contacted him. He said to meet me, and he gave it to him. But in the interim, 5 other people contacted him, and he sort of said, "I gave it out already. I already gave the offer out." But then he just started continuing it. Right now, all of that is a person who has embedded within him, without him knowing, right? Is almost this trust in God that there is something greater, and I'm going to turn my great darkness into a light. That's really what it is, without being able to articulate it. So we have to. I'm going to say it in another way: is advocate for our higher self. If you remember these words, because I like this phrase very much, and I repeat it often. We have to advocate for our higher self. That it's natural and easy to live in how did this happen? It's such a terrible thing, and to just be stuck in the tragedy of it, right? But there's something far, far greater than that, and that is advocating for our higher self. And our higher self is living out of a context of trust in God, that there is a purpose, there is a destiny, despite everything being so overwhelming, and despite the fear of saying what I'm saying, because how can you say that when there's so much tragedy? Because we're higher than the tragedy, so we have to speak higher than the tragedy and live from a deeper place than the tragedy. And this has been the great secret of the Jewish people. This is our secret. This is why we are an eternal people. I hope that somehow helped a little bit. Anna.
It did, but do you have time real quick?
Yes.
So you also, this is the hardest for me to apply when you said that you can't, I'm going to paraphrase it, but you can't take it against the person because it's God who's sending. I've been trying to apply whatever you said. I've been trying, sometimes successful, sometimes not so much, to apply it to the tragedy the way you just described. But what comes up for me is hate, which I never experienced ever in my life towards, other people, terroristic organizations. So how do we apply this? It's not God. It's not them. It's God who is orchestrating this. Yeah. This is very challenging. The hate, the negative emotions.
Rabbi?
Yeah, just a second, Marilyn. So actually, Anna, on page 161, we have dealing with enemies. But I'm going to answer you now before we even get there, because I'm not sure that we'll get there today. So I'm going to answer you in just a moment. I just want to hear what Marilyn has to say, and then I'm going to respond to you about enemies and hate. Yes, Marilyn.
When something happens that's a man-made tragedy, in my mind, we have to remember that God gave us free will. And some people use that free will to do bad. But from the free will comes God's silver lining, as you phrase it. So because he gave us free will, he does not control everything that everybody does. But he does take some of these tragedies and make good out of them.
Okay, so let me, if I may, just tweak a little bit what you said, and then go back to Anna's question, because it's all related. It's all really the same thing. So God does limit our free choice. He limits our free choice by our abilities. Okay, and one of the ways he limits our abilities is whether what we will do will be successful. Which is not that the results are not in our control. So there is no one that can do anything to you or I if God doesn't want us to experience it. Okay, now I know that this is a major statement, because that means that the terrorists that did what they did could not have done what they did successfully if God didn't want us to experience it. Okay, but that's exactly what it means, which means that we look at everything that happens to me. I look at everything that happens to me as God's will, that God wants that to happen to me. Okay, that's point number one. And I have not answered your question at all yet, but here's the second point, Anna, which really answers your question, which I hope will help with your question. Let me put it that way. Mm-hmm. There are two things, and this is a distinction that it takes time sometimes for people to create, because we very much have a very hard time disassociating what someone does with the results of what they do. And this is a very important point, and maybe this is a way of expressing it. I don't think I've ever said it this way before. There's cause and there's effect. We generally associate cause with effect. This cause creates this effect. from a faith point of view, which is a reality point of view, it's important to create a divide between cause and effect. Cause does not necessarily create effect. It looks like it does, but it doesn't necessarily. Cause will not create effect unless God wants the effect to be there. Otherwise, the cause will fail. And that's why we know that many times in our lives, we make a great effort towards something, which is a cause, and we don't get the effect. Sometimes we hardly make a cause, right? We do a cheap shot at the cause, and suddenly there's a major effect. So we clearly can see that there is no direct correlation between cause and effect. And we have to understand that we work in the cause department, God works in the effect department, which means that if someone wants to do something to us, a cause, it will not necessarily have any effect on us. If God doesn't want it to have an effect on us, it will have no effect on us. If God does, no matter what type of cause this person does, better or worse, it will have its effect because God wants that effect. Which means what happens to me, the effect, which is what I experience, I relate purely to God because effect is God's department. Now, to answer your to at least address to work with your question, when someone chooses to be a cause, which is a negative cause, right? Whether it has the effect, the desired effect or not, which is God's decision, not the person's decision. When a person chooses to do a cause which is negative, God holds them fully accountable for being an agent of evil in this world, which means that while on one hand, I see I see what happens to me in the context of God wanting me to experience that. At the very same time, I hold the other person, the person who did the negativity against the will of God, which is an evil thing to do, 100% fully accountable. Not because I'm angry at them that they did this to me, because they didn't do anything to me, but because they've chosen to be an agent of evil. The Torah mandates that we have a justice system, and when someone does something negative, we hold them accountable. So therefore, when there are terrorists, we must eradicate people who threaten human life, right? So, however, we're now looking at both sides of this differently than we normally do. We normally look at it out of a personal vengeance. Now it's no longer a personal vengeance, it's actually coming out of a commitment to good, which is a responsibility I have in this world that God put me in, especially as a Jew, to make sure that this world is a good place, and good means godly. So now the difference between when we look at it the way I just described it, that the effect is God, the cause is an evil person, my response will be very, very different than when we look at it as normal people look at it, where this evil person did this to me. And let me explain how. Part of it I already explained. When I realize that everything that happens to me is from God, number one is I'm not a victim. I'm not vengeful. I'm not angry. I'm not full of hate. I'm not blaming. All of those things are out. I'm relating to God about what happened to me. When I then go on the mission, which I have a responsibility to do to eradicate the evil, I don't do it out of hate, and I don't do it out of revenge. I do it out of a divine mission. And I want you to understand something. And I'll tell you the example I use. I think I have it in my book, but this is a very important, to me, a very important example. When Israeli commandos are dropped into enemy territory in order to battle a pocket of terrorists, the very worst thing that can happen is for them to enter into an emotional state. If they're gripped with fear, if they're gripped with anger, right, they will no longer have clarity of mind to focus on the very vital mission they're in. That means commandos who are operating on a very high level and doing a very critical mission have to be very clear-headed, and no emotion triggering them. And they're trained this way. If something goes off, not to lose it. Don't get emotional. Just ask yourself, what is the best thing I can do here? When a person eradicates evil out of hate or out of vengeance, they are in an emotional state. They will never do their job nearly as well as someone who is clear-headed. And clear-headed is a person who trusts in God. So it serves every single level. Now, and if you need some help with this, just think about the last time you got upset at someone, right? Maybe it was a family member, and the way you communicated with them and how unproductive that was because you were in an emotional state. And anger is an emotional state. And vengeance is an emotional state. Now, I can be driven. And by the way, I also want to say that the most powerful and motivating person is a person who's committed to something out of purpose, not out of emotion, because they're focused. Someone who's living out of emotion is not focused. And the Torah demonstrates this to us numerous times. There are 3 stories the Torah tells us about Moses, who was, as we read in the last final Torah portion of the Torah, which we're going to be reading on Simchas Torah, right? That Moshe Ish Elokim, that Moshe was a man of God, right? We don't have that phrase about anyone else. He was a real man of God. That means that trusting God, he was there and on a level that we can't even imagine. But there were 3 instances where he got upset. And every time in those 3 times he got upset, he made a mistake. Because the moment a person is in a state of upsetness, they cannot have clarity of mind. So all of what I just said has to be thought about, and maybe listen to this piece of the class over and over and over. Maybe I'll draw out a clip of this and put it out for October 7th.
That would be great.
And and listen to it over and over, and try applying it. Play with it is what I would say. Play with it to see what life looks like when you approach things this way.
Rabbi, it seems to me, though, that a commando who's trained in these ways, or at least an elite unit, because they have the capacity to maybe endure some of those environments, it's a different situation than the innocent people that were plucked from their homes, the children, the people who are still being held captive right now. That how do you think about someone who is an amazing human being? I heard a woman talking on a Momentum program yesterday in tribute to October 7th about her husband. She was let free after 50 days of captivity. Her husband's still there. She described her husband, and the guy sounds like a joy, not a tzaddik, but boy, an amazing, amazing human.
Yeah.
You think now his spirit is being tested and perhaps broken, his family shattered. That's very different. How can you say, well, what is he? He's making amends for something in a previous lifetime. I mean, there's no explanation for what he's going through right now, what he has to endure. I agree. Not trained for it. None of us are. For that.
Right. So what's your question?
That it doesn't seem like the same situation where you could say a commando needs to stay away from emotion, and once he does, he puts himself in a dangerous situation. A person like this, may be striving to find a way to get through this in some form and remain sane and alive and not overcome by hatred. But everything they're doing is to strip him of all of his humanity through various forms of torture. And most Jews that come out of this situation have the response like during the Holocaust. They were innocent in a sense because they could never imagine the amount of evil that a human, quote unquote human, could be capable of. So that's what I'm asking is, to me, that's creating a situation of almost like pure innocence put into pure evil. And I don't know how to make sense of that. Not that it's not Hashem's will, but the fact that it may be Hashem's will. And how do we explain something so treacherous?
Okay.
So horrid.
Okay. So a few things. First, number one, a person that finds themselves in this situation, the person themselves, right? I do not expect and would not expect anyone to not be in an emotional state. Okay, and be overwhelmed beyond imagination by emotion. So I just can't imagine that they wouldn't be overwhelmed by emotion and just totally like, right. We're talking ideally in a class, not as individuals who are not in a situation. And even while I'm talking about it, I am not assuming that we're anyone to find themselves in such an extreme situation that they wouldn't be in a completely emotional state. But we're talking ideally, like in the most ideal form, were we able to be, right? Were we of people of enormous stature, this would be the perspective that the person would have. And this helps us only to the extent that it will help us when we find ourselves in different situations. And we'll be able to apply it more in lighter situations and probably less in more extreme situations. But the more and the more we will apply it to lighter situations, the more we'll be able to apply it to more extreme situations. At the same time. So and again, so I want to reiterate that I am not applying this to someone else. I am not saying that that person, that hostage, should have this perspective. That hostage should have whatever perspective they have, and all I want to do is hug them for the rest of my life to support them for what they've gone through. That's it, right? That's why I said before, this is only for us. It's only for me. We learn things for me, right? For another person, we show only compassion. At the same time, there was another hostage by the name of Sapir Cohen. Again, this is heroics. I'm not holding anyone to a standard here, but we see that there is fascinating ability that lies within us. There was another hostage, a young a girl, Sapir Cohen, I don't know, maybe 21, 22, I don't remember her age, who's spoken a lot, and she said that when she was in captivity, she decided that she's only going to be an expression of light. To the extent that her captive, like, once told her that, whenever you're in the room, I feel like the room is illuminated, right? So she was able to, right, which is very unusual. I want to acknowledge that it's very unusual. But we even see she's an ordinary person. She's not a religious person, right? And yet she was able to let her neshama shine forth in this unbelievable way. So the capacity is there, right, within all of us. It requires Herculean efforts to be able to express that. Surely I would not expect of anyone to be able to express that, or even from myself. And I know from little things in life, I can tell you things in the last couple of days that have happened where I was not in the proper emotional state, right? From things I would never even say within in the context of what we're talking about, right? And I try and I'm aware of that I'm grateful I can be aware of that and work on keeping things in the context of reality. And reality is what I explained before, that there's cause and there's effect. There's cause and there's outcome. Outcome is God's, and cause is what people do. Here's what I want to emphasize more than anything else. When I say advocating for your higher self, I am saying that our natural gravitation will be towards looking at these situations the normal way. And that is seeing ourselves, seeing other people being able to harm us and do bad to us, etc., and being angry at them. And I would never judge anyone for seeing it that way. But as we discuss this in the context of depth and of truth and of a much greater offering of how to look at things, then we're learning that there's a more true and honest way of looking at every circumstance in our life, and that is that anything that happens to me is from God, and anything that someone does to perpetuate, to perpetrate that, they are fully 100% responsible for. And as long as I know what happens to me is from God, I'm not going to be angry about it. I may be very upset. I may be very hurt. I may be angry at God, right? I may be angry at God. And then that person I will hold accountable in whatever manner the Torah teaches us to hold them accountable. And we're going to see an example later that the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, right? Well, I'm going to use an example he doesn't, not an exact example he uses, but an example I always use because I think it's a softer example. It's not such an extreme example, and that is when someone steals $1,000 from me. They rip me off of $1,000. So there are two things. There is being ripped off of $1,000, right? That's not right. That's baby stuff, baby issues compared to what we were just talking about. But people get very upset about that. And when they get very upset because that person ripped me off, now how dare they do that? It's like that person took advantage of me and ripped me off. The true way to look at that situation is I am short $1,000 because God had it designed that I would be short $1,000. Somehow, some way that's going to happen to me, whether it's this person doing it, whether it's me, my car breaking down and I have to fix it for $1,000 or whatever else it's going to be. It's going to happen one way or another. And so therefore, my loss, I deal with directly with God. The fact that this person did something which is wrong, they have to be brought to a court of justice. A thief has to be brought to the court of justice. But it's not because they cheated me or they took advantage of me. It's because they did something they shouldn't do, which is right between them and God. But in this situation, God says a human court should deal with this. I bring them to court and I use full justice to correct it. And it's two separate things. So no longer am I taking it personally. I'm not even angry at this person. I can even say good morning to them. We're going to see these examples, which we're not going to get to today, but we're going to see these examples. Exactly that. How do you deal with enemies? You do good for them. Not in a way that they can take advantage of you and hurt you more, but just in the way of, I'm going to treat them wonderfully. I will even help them. And anything that they did wrong, I will hold them accountable for in a court of justice where that's called for. This is a beautiful conversation. We really have to think about it over and over and over. It's not easy. It goes against everything that we everything that with the normal way of us thinking about things. But this is what we just discussed right now is the transformation and the game changer. The type of person that you and I will be as we embrace this more and more, you can't even imagine. There will be people who will insult you to your face and you will be unfazed because you will know that the insult, that the feeling of insult that you're feeling is something God wanted you to experience. And the fact that they chose to be the one who's doing the insulting is on them. To be a nasty person is on them. But I have no issue with them. That's their business in who they want to be in this world. The moment we can create a distinction between what people do and what I experience, we have a entirely different life that we live. Entirely different life.